The light came first, silent and predatory. It wasn't the warm, golden light of the setting North Carolina sun that Anya Sharma had come to cherish. This was a cold, artificial blue and red, bleeding across the tall pines that guarded her property line. It painted the bark of the ancient oaks in frantic, strobing hues, a silent alarm that screamed through the evening calm. There were no sirens. The silence was worse. It was deliberate, a hunter's stealth. Beside her, Ghost, a pale-furred Belgian Malinois, the color of smoke and bone, rose from his resting spot on the porch. He made no sound, but the shift was electric, a coiled spring of muscle and honed instinct. On her other side, Nyx, his darker sable-coated counterpart, mirrored the movement. Her head lifted, ears swiveling to pinpoint the source of the intrusion. They didn't bark. They didn't need to. In their world, noise was a liability. They were instruments of silence and precision, and they had just detected a threat. Anya placed a steadying hand on Ghost's neck, her thumb rubbing a familiar circle behind his ear. Her heart rate remained slow, a disciplined rhythm practiced over years in places where a spike in adrenaline could get you killed. She watched as the first police cruiser, then a second, and finally a third, crunched slowly down her long gravel driveway. They weren't coming for a social call. The way they positioned themselves, a perfect triangular formation, blocking any exit, was a tactical maneuver, an act of containment. This was how it began, not with a bang, but with a trespass of light, stealing the peace she had fought so hard to build on this patch of earth she called Wind's End. Just hours earlier, that peace had felt real, tangible. The day had started as they all did, a 5-mile run at dawn, with Ghost and Nyx flanking her in a fluid, effortless rhythm. Their paws barely disturbed the fallen leaves on the forest trails. They were not pets jogging with their owner. They were a unit, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of thousands of hours of training in the dust-choked mountains of Afghanistan. After the run, she'd opened the small veterinary clinic she ran out of a converted barn on her property. Her work was her therapy. The simple, honest problems of the animals in Redemption County, a calf with a fever, a hound with a torn paw, a litter of kittens needing a home, were a welcome antidote to the complex, dishonest problems of men. The farm, all 50 acres of rolling pasture and dense woods, had been her husband Liam's dream. After he'd been returned to her under the flag he'd served, the farm had become her sanctuary. His memory was in the sturdy beams of the barn, in the way the wind whispered through the fields. It was the only place the ghosts of her past felt less like tormentors and more like quiet companions. Ghost and Nyx were part of that sanctuary. They were officially retired military working dogs, deemed unfit for redeployment after the same ambush that had taken Liam. The official report cited operational stress. Anya knew the truth. They were heartbroken, just like her. They had lost their handler, their alpha. When the army offered them to her, it was a quiet acknowledgement of their shared loss. She had retrained them, not for combat, but for peace. She'd rebuilt their trust, and in doing so, had slowly begun to rebuild her own. But the world outside Wind's End was changing. Over the past year, the sleepy rural landscape of Redemption County had begun to transform. On the far side of the woods that bordered her property, a new community was rising. Oak Haven. Signs along the main road announced it with bold, confident lettering. Oak Haven, a future forged by us, for us, a project by the Thorne Development Group. It was a massive undertaking, led by a charismatic and ambitious black developer named Marcus Thorne. He was buying up old farms and empty lots, building modern homes, shops, and community centers. He promised a self-sufficient, prosperous enclave, a haven for black families seeking to escape the systemic obstacles of the cities. Anya admired the ambition, the sheer force of will it took to carve out such a dream. Yet, as Oak Haven grew, so did an invisible line. The air in the local feed store grew thick with whispers. Old-timers complained about the new traffic, the new faces. There was a tension, a feeling of two separate worlds existing in a fragile, unspoken truce. The fragility of that truce had become starkly clear this afternoon. She'd been driving back from a supply run when she saw Mr. Gable's old Ford truck stalled on the side of the road, steam pouring from the hood, not a quarter-mile from her gate. He was a frail man in his late 70s, a neighbor whose family had farmed this land for generations. Anya pulled over to help. As she was connecting the jumper cables, a sleek new SUV slowed to a stop. 4 young black men, all residents of Oak Haven by the look of their clothes and the confidence in their posture, got out. They didn't offer to help. They watched, their arms crossed. Having some trouble, old-timer? One of them asked, his voice dripping with something that wasn't quite sympathy. Just a dead battery, son, Mr. Gable mumbled, his face flushed with embarrassment. Anya ignored them, focusing on her task. Should just be another minute, Henry, she said, her voice calm. You're on our road now, you know, another young man said, directing his words at Gable but his eyes at Anya. This is Oakhaven territory. It's a public road, Anya stated simply, not looking up. Not for long, the first one smirked. Times are changing. Don't need your kind of help around here anymore. The implied meaning hung heavy in the humid air. Your kind. It was a small thing, a verbal jab, but it was a piece of the larger, unsettling picture. Anya finished her work. The truck engine turned over with a roar, and Mr. Gable drove off with a grateful wave. The young men got back in their SUV and sped away, leaving Anya alone on the roadside, the echo of their words lingering like a bad taste. Now, hours later, the cruisers sat in her driveway, their engines humming a low, threatening tune. The confrontation on the road felt like a prelude, a deliberate poke to test her reaction. This felt like the response. The door of the lead cruiser opened. A man emerged, his silhouette framed by the flashing lights. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with an unnerving confidence. He wasn't a patrol officer. His posture screamed authority. He wore a detective's plain clothes, a badge clipped to his belt. As he stepped into the light of the porch, Anya could see his face clearly. He was a black man, his expression a mask of unreadable professionalism. He stopped 20 feet from the porch, his eyes flicking from Anya to the two silent, powerful dogs at her side. He didn't seem intimidated. He seemed appraising. Anya said nothing. Her training had taught her the value of silence. Never speak first. Never give away your position. Let the opponent make the first move. The man's voice, when it came, was smooth and deep, cutting through the evening air like polished steel. Dr. Anya Sharma, he called out, his tone polite, almost casual. My name is Detective Caleb Vance. I'm afraid we need to have a word with you. Anya remained on the porch, a silent statue flanked by her two living shadows. She registered the detective's name, Caleb Vance, and filed it away. His approach was a study in controlled aggression. He didn't swagger, he flowed, each step measured. He was using the cruiser lights to his advantage, keeping himself partially silhouetted while she was fully illuminated on her own porch, a specimen under a microscope. A word about what, detective? Anya's voice was even, betraying none of the cold alertness coursing through her. We've received a number of complaints from your new neighbors, Vance said, his gaze sweeping over the property, lingering on the barn and the dense tree line. Reports of excessive noise specifically, dogs barking aggressively at all hours. Also, a complaint about, let's call it disruptive behavior near a public roadway this afternoon. Now, the accusation was a masterpiece of fabrication. Ghost and Nix were the quietest dogs in the county. They were trained to operate in stealth. Unnecessary barking had been conditioned out of them years ago. And the disruptive behavior was a gross twisting of her helping Mr. Gable. This wasn't an investigation. It was a script. My dogs don't bark unless there's a direct, immediate threat, detective, Anya said. And I was assisting a stranded motorist this afternoon. You're welcome to verify that with Mr. Henry Gable. We'll get to that, Vance said dismissively. He began to walk, not toward her, but in a slow, deliberate arc along the edge of her manicured lawn. It was a perimeter check, a way of asserting control over the space. The other two officers got out of their cruisers but remained by their vehicles, their hands resting casually on their belts. It was a classic tactical setup, one primary point of contact, with two support elements creating a field of fire, a geometry of a threat. This is a beautiful piece of land, Dr. Sharma, Vance mused, his voice carrying easily in the quiet. 50 acres, I hear. Lots of privacy. But that privacy ends where your neighbor's peace begins. You're a veteran, aren't you? U.S. Army? The question was a probe, designed to destabilize her. He was checking to see if she would react emotionally, perhaps defensively, to the mention of her service. My service record is a matter of public record, but it's not relevant to this conversation, Anya replied, her eyes tracking his every move. I think it is, he countered smoothly. Sometimes, folks who've seen combat, they have a hard time readjusting. They can be a little on edge. Maybe you perceive threats where there are none. Maybe your dogs pick up on that. It's a stressful world. End of 40. He was building a narrative. the unstable veteran, a danger to the peaceful new community. It was insidious, a weaponization of her own trauma. Anya felt a flicker of anger, hot and sharp, but she smothered it instantly. Anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had to stay colder than him. She activated the audio recording app on her phone with a subtle, practiced movement of her thumb, the device resting face down on the porch railing beside her. Vance completed his arc and stopped near a low, temporary fence she'd put up to protect a new patch of wildflowers from deer. It was flimsy, just wire mesh and a few wooden stakes. He gestured toward it. "This part of your fence seems a bit unsteady." Before Anya could respond, he nudged it with the toe of his polished shoe. The stake wobbled. He nudged it again, harder this time. The stake gave way, and a 10-foot section of the fence sagged to the ground with a soft, metallic sigh. It was a calculated provocation. A test. Anya's body tensed. Every instinct screamed at her to react, to shout, to defend the small, violated boundary. But she held her ground, her expression unchanging. She knew exactly what he wanted. "That's a shame," she said, her voice a flat line. "I'll have to fix that tomorrow." A flicker of disappointment crossed Vance's face. He had expected an outburst. When he didn't get one, he escalated. He took a step over the fallen fence, planting his foot firmly on her property. He was now trespassing. "I think, for the safety of the community, we need to take a look at your animals, Dr. Sharma. Ensure they're properly secured," he said, his voice hardening, dropping the pretense of politeness. He took another step toward the porch. That was the line. He was now within 20 feet, the universally recognized zone of engagement. His hands were free, his posture forward. He was a clear and advancing threat. Anya didn't raise her voice. She didn't move a muscle. She simply spoke a single, low-frequency word, a command that was more of a vibration in the air than a sound. Stelling. It was a Dutch word, a relic from their original training lineage, meaning position. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. From their relaxed stances, Ghost and Nyx exploded into motion. It wasn't a frantic rush, but a silent, fluid deployment. Ghost, the lighter of the two, shot to Anya's right, circling to the edge of the porch steps, creating a flanking position that cut off Vance's angle of approach. Nyx moved to the left, planting herself directly between Anya and the detective, a solid wall of dark fur and coiled power. They didn't make a sound, no growls, no bared teeth. Their stillness was more menacing than any display of aggression. Their heads were low, their bodies taut, and their eyes intelligent, focused, and utterly devoid of fear were locked onto Vance. They were no longer dogs. They were a living, breathing barrier, two perfectly positioned weapon systems awaiting their next command. The air crackled with a new kind of tension. Detective Vance froze mid-stride. His professional mask finally slipped, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock, which quickly morphed into something else, the primal, instinctive recognition of a superior predator. His hand twitched, a reflexive move toward the weapon on his hip, but he stopped himself. The other two officers by the cars straightened up, their casual postures vanishing, their hands now firmly on their holsters. They saw it too. This was not a woman with a couple of big dogs. This was a handler with a team, and for the first time since he had arrived, Detective Caleb Vance looked uncertain. He had crossed a line, and something on the other side had just pushed back. Hard. The standoff held for 3 long, silent heartbeats. The world seemed to shrink to the space between the porch and the detective, a battlefield defined by the unwavering focus of the two dogs. The chirping of crickets in the tall grass sounded unnaturally loud, a nervous soundtrack to the frozen tableau. Detective Vance was a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered, but the control of this space had been decisively wrested from him. He couldn't advance, and a retreat would be a concession of defeat. He was pinned. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a new set of headlights cut through the darkness. A different kind of light, not the frantic red and blue of law enforcement, but the steady, powerful white beams of a luxury sedan. The car, a sleek black Mercedes, glided down the driveway with an almost regal silence and parked behind the police cruisers. The driver's door opened, and a man emerged. Even in the chaotic lighting, his presence was immediately commanding. He was tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that seemed out of place in the rural setting, yet he wore it with an effortless grace. As he stepped forward, into the spill of the porch light, Anya recognized him from the promotional billboards along the highway. It was Marcus Thorne. He moved past the cruisers, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel. He took in the scene with a quick, intelligent glance. The 3 officers, weapons at the ready, Anya, standing firm on her porch, and the two silent, imposing dogs that held the ground between them. His face, a canvas of handsome, sharp features, settled into an expression of profound disappointment and concern. Detective Vance. Thorne's voice was a rich baritone, carrying an authority that eclipsed the detective's own. What is the meaning of this? I thought we had an understanding. Vance stiffened, turning to face the newcomer. The spell was broken. Mr. Thorne, this is official police business. We received complaints. I am aware of the complaints. Thorne cut him off, the words sharp with disapproval. He didn't raise his voice, but the rebuke was unmistakable. He walked directly toward Vance, stopping beside him and turning to face Anya. In doing so, he positioned himself as a shield, a mediator. Dr. Sharma, on behalf of the Oak Haven community, I am so deeply sorry for this intrusion. This is not how we treat our neighbors. This is not the way forward. He then turned back to Vance, his voice dropping to a low, intense register that Anya could still overhear. Your job is to build bridges, Caleb, not burn them. You were to assess, to report back, not to intimidate a decorated veteran on her own property. Look at this. It's a disgrace. Vance's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He looked less like a detective and more like a subordinate being dressed down. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Thorne gestured dismissively toward the cruisers. Go, all of you. Leave this property immediately. I will handle this. We will discuss your lack of discretion later. For a moment, Vance looked like he might argue. A flicker of defiance crossed his face, but it was extinguished by Thorne's unwavering, commanding gaze. With a curt nod, he turned and walked back to his car. The other two officers, looking visibly relieved to be out of the crossfire, followed suit. Within a minute, the three police cruisers backed out of the driveway, their lights extinguished, and disappeared down the road, plunging the farm back into the quiet dark of the evening. The silence they left behind was heavy with unanswered questions. Marcus Thorne stood for a moment, watching them go, as if to ensure his order was obeyed. Then he turned to Anya, his expression softening into one of earnest apology. Again, Dr. Sharma, I cannot apologize enough. There are growing pains in any new community. Sometimes, zeal can be mistaken for diligence. I promise you, it will be addressed. Anya didn't relax her posture. She gave a quiet, one-word command. Vrij, the Dutch word for free. And Ghost and Nix obediently backed away from their defensive positions, returning to sit calmly at her sides. Their eyes, however, never left Thorne. Your officer was trespassing, Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice still level. He was attempting to provoke a reaction. And you did not give him one, Thorne observed, a note of genuine admiration in his voice. He looked at the two dogs. Extraordinary animals. I can see why he was out of his depth. The entire performance was flawless. The timely arrival, the public chastisement, the positioning of himself as the reasonable, benevolent leader cleaning up the mess made by his overzealous underlings. It was perfect. Too perfect. Anya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. She was being skillfully managed, her anger diffused, her guard lowered by a man who had, in essence, just called off his own attack dogs. The relationship between Thorne and Vance was not one of a concerned citizen and a police officer. It was one of a patron and his client. Thorne took a step closer, stopping at a respectful distance. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a slim, elegant business card case. I truly hope we can move past this unfortunate incident, he said, extending the card to her. I want Oak Haven and its neighbors to coexist in harmony. We're building something special here, something I hope you'll come to appreciate. Anya took the card. The heavy stock felt smooth and expensive in her hand. Marcus Thorne, CEO, Thorne Development Group. If you have any further trouble, you call my personal number on that card, day or night, he continued, his voice resonating with sincerity. Or, if you ever feel like discussing the future and the role this beautiful piece of land might play in it, I would consider it a privilege to speak with you. I believe I can be a very reasonable man. He gave her a final, charming smile, turned, and walked back to his Mercedes. The powerful engine started with a whisper, and the car disappeared into the night, leaving Anya alone on her porch, the silence now more unnerving than the confrontation itself. She looked down at the card in her hand. It wasn't an apology, it was an invitation, and a warning. She hadn't just been dealing with a crooked cop. She was facing an opponent who played a much longer, much more sophisticated game. And he had just made his opening move. A week passed. The silence that followed the confrontation was absolute, a stark contrast to the tension that had preceded it. There were no more police cruisers, no more probing questions. The world outside Wind's End seemed to have forgotten she existed. It was a calculated quiet, Anya knew, designed to make her feel safe, to make her question if she had overreacted. It was a psychological tactic, a lull before the next stage of the campaign. She spent the days reinforcing her property's security, not with weapons, but with information, installing discreet, motion-activated cameras along her fence line and driveway. On the 8th day, Marcus Thorne returned. He came as he had left, in his silent Mercedes, but this time he didn't stop at the driveway. He drove right up to the house, parking near the porch, as if he were an old friend arriving for Sunday dinner. He got out carrying a large wicker basket filled with artisan bread, jars of what looked like homemade preserves, and a bottle of wine. It was a perfect picture of neighborly charm. Anya met him on the porch, Ghost and Nix positioned silently behind her. She didn't invite him in. Dr. Sharma. He greeted her with a warm smile, seemingly unfazed by the canine sentinels. A peace offering, from the new bakery and farmer's market at Oak Haven. I wanted you to taste what we're building. Community isn't just about houses, it's about breaking bread. He set the basket down on the porch steps, a disarming gesture. He didn't try to force his way into her space. Instead, he began to talk, his voice filled with a preacher's passion, painting a vivid picture of his vision. He spoke of creating a legacy, a place where Black families could build generational wealth, where children could play without fear, and where excellence was the standard, not the exception. He described the charter school he planned to build, the tech incubator for young entrepreneurs, the community gardens that would provide fresh, healthy food. It's about self-determination, Doctor, he said, his eyes alight. For too long, others have decided our fate, drawn the lines on our maps. Here, we draw our own. We build our own tables. He was deeply persuasive. Anya found herself listening, caught in the undertow of his conviction. For a moment, she could almost believe in his dream, in the noble purpose he described. He let the vision hang in the air for a moment before turning his attention to her. But there's a piece missing, the heart of it all, the place where the school and the community center are meant to stand, the highest point of land in the county, with a view of the whole valley. His gaze drifted over her property, over the rolling hills that sloped up behind the barn. This land, he finally got to the point. I am prepared to offer you $1.5 million for your property, Dr. Sharma. That's 50% above its current appraised market value. A cash offer, closes in 2 weeks. No contingencies. The number was staggering. It was more than enough to start over anywhere in the world, to build a new sanctuary, a new life, free from the ghosts of Redemption County. It was a temptation, a golden key offered to unlock her from this brewing conflict. She felt a pang of longing for that simple escape. But then she looked at the barn, where Liam had carved their initials into a beam. She looked at the ancient oak tree where they had planned to hang a swing for the children they never had. This wasn't just land, it was a repository of memory, the last physical anchor to the life she had lost. Selling it would feel like a second betrayal. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice quiet but firm. It's a generous offer, but this farm is not for sale. It's my home. The change was instantaneous. It was as if a switch had been flipped behind his eyes. The warm, passionate community leader vanished, replaced by a cold, pragmatic businessman. The charming smile dissolved, leaving his features sharp and hard. Home is a temporary concept, Doctor, he said, his voice losing its warmth, becoming flat and metallic. It's a collection of wood and nails on a plot of dirt. What I'm offering is a future. What you're clinging to is a mausoleum. The cruelty of the word mausoleum was a deliberate, surgical strike, aimed directly at her grief. I tried to do this the easy way, he continued, his tone now laced with a chilling disappointment. I prefer partnerships to problems, but history, Dr. Sharma, is not written by those who cling to the past. It's forged by those who have the vision to seize the future. You should think long and hard about which side of that history you want to be on. He didn't wait for a response. He turned, got back into his car, and drove away, leaving the basket of gifts sitting on her porch like a Trojan horse. The threat was no longer veiled. It was a promise. That night, Anya's unease curdled into cold fear. She was filling the water troughs for her small herd of rescue horses when she noticed the water from the well pump was discolored, carrying a faint, oily sheen. It had a strange, chemical odor, sharp and acrid. She quickly took a sample, her hands shaking slightly. She knew, with a certainty that settled like a stone in her gut, that this was not an accident. The quiet war had just escalated. They hadn't just trespassed on her land anymore. They had poisoned it. The contaminated well was a declaration of war. It transformed Anya's struggle from a defense of her home into a fight for survival. She immediately switched her entire property, including the clinic and the livestock, to the secondary well located on the far side of the farm, hoping it was deep enough to be unaffected. The act itself was a quiet, brutal message. We can touch you whenever we want. We can poison the very ground beneath your feet. Anya knew she couldn't fight this alone anymore. Reporting it to the county sheriff felt futile. Vance's presence suggested the local police were, at best, compromised. She needed an ally who operated outside the system, someone who understood the kind of unseen warfare she was now engaged in. She needed Leo. Leo Sterling had been the intel analyst for her unit in Afghanistan, a quiet, unassuming tech sergeant who could pull actionable intelligence from the chaotic digital ether like a magician pulling rabbits from a hat. He saw the world in data streams and encrypted signals. After leaving the service, he'd founded a boutique cybersecurity firm, applying his military-grade skills to corporate espionage and high-stakes digital security. He owed Anya his life, a debt he never spoke of but that existed between them, solid and unbreakable, from a day when Ghost's predecessor had found an IED meant for Leo's convoy. She carefully bottled a sample of the contaminated water, packaged it in a cooler, and sent it overnight to Leo's lab in Austin, Texas. Along with it, she sent a single, encrypted message. Liam's farm. Trouble. Thorn Development Group. Need a ghost trace. While she waited for Leo to work his magic, Anya began her own reconnaissance. Her past wasn't just about handling dogs. It was about threat assessment, pattern recognition, and surveillance. She retrieved a small, high-resolution quadcopter drone from a locked footlocker in her closet, a piece of personal equipment she hadn't used since leaving the service. It was a silent, night vision-capable eye in the sky. For 3 consecutive nights, under the cover of a new moon, she sent the drone high above the tree line, its quiet electric motors nearly undetectable from the ground. She flew it over the sprawling Oakhaven development. During the day, the site bustled with the construction of homes and storefronts, a perfect picture of community building. But at night, a different kind of work was taking place. In a remote, heavily secured section of the development, far from the public-facing areas, large, unmarked trucks were delivering heavy, industrial-grade equipment. The drone's thermal imaging camera picked up the heat signatures of deep earth-moving machinery, not the kind used for laying housing foundations, but the kind used for excavation. They were digging, deep and fast, under the glare of powerful, portable light towers. Whatever they were building back there, it wasn't a school. On the 4th day, Leo called. His voice was grim, stripped of its usual light-hearted sarcasm. Anya, you're not dealing with a real estate developer, he said, no preamble. You've kicked a hornet's nest the size of a planet. What did you find? She asked, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. First, the water sample, Leo began. It's a nasty cocktail, primarily a mix of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and heavy metal distillates. It's a signature blend, a specific industrial byproduct. I cross-referenced the chemical fingerprint against an environmental disaster database. I got a perfect match. He paused. It's the same contaminant that poisoned a river in the state of Veracruz, Mexico, 3 years ago. A massive ecological disaster. The source was a mineral processing plant owned by a multinational conglomerate called TerraCorp. Anya felt a cold dread seep into her bones. She had heard the name. TerraCorp was a corporate leviathan, a behemoth with tentacles in mining, energy, and logistics across the globe. They were infamous for their aggressive tactics, their lobbying power, and their trail of environmental devastation, always expertly shielded by layers of legal firewalls. Thorn, she said, the pieces clicking into place. What's his connection? Marcus Thorn is a ghost, Leo replied. His company, the Thorn Development Group, was incorporated 18 months ago. Its funding is a maze of offshore holding companies and shell corporations, but when you peel back enough layers, the money trail leads straight back to one place, a venture capital firm that is a fully owned, unlisted subsidiary of TerraCorp. The picture snapped into sharp, horrifying focus. Oakhaven isn't a community project. Anya whispered, looking out her window at the distant lights of the development. It's a front. It's the most brilliant, diabolical land grab I've ever seen, Leo confirmed, his voice a mix of awe and disgust. TerraCorp has been trying to get access to that region for years. Geological surveys show it sits on one of the largest untapped deposits of rare earth minerals in North America. But they could never get the zoning permits. Environmental pushback was too strong. So they created a proxy. He laid it all out. TerraCorp had funded Thorne, using his genuine charisma and the noble, unimpeachable cause of black empowerment as a socio-political shield. They were using the promise of a utopian community to acquire the land by proxy, bypassing all the environmental red tape. Once they owned it all, the Oak Haven Charter would be amended. The zoning changed under the guise of economic development for a disadvantaged community, and the real project would begin, a massive, open-pit mine and a toxic processing facility. Marcus Thorne and the entire community he was building were just pawns, a human shield to absorb public outrage and political blowback. And your farm, Anya? Leo added softly. According to the geological maps, it's sitting directly on top of the richest, most accessible part of the deposit. It's not the heart of his community. It's the epicenter of their mine. Anya hung up the phone, a profound sense of vertigo washing over her. This was never about a dispute between neighbors. It wasn't about race or gentrification. It was about greed on a global scale. She was a single woman on a small farm, standing in the way of a multi-billion-dollar corporate machine that crushed everything in its path. She looked at Ghost and Nix, who sat watching her, sensing her distress. Her fight was no longer just for a piece of land filled with memories. She was now the unwilling guardian of a truth that could bring down an empire and get her buried in the process. The knowledge of TerraCorp's involvement changed the nature of the threat. It was no longer a matter of if they would come back, but how. A corporation like that didn't tolerate loose ends. Anya was a loose end. She spent the next 48 hours preparing not for a confrontation, but for an assault on the truth. She worked with Leo to back up all his research, along with her drone footage, to multiple encrypted off-site servers. She made digital deadman switches if she didn't check in every 12 hours. The entire data package would be automatically sent to a list of investigative journalists and environmental watchdog groups. It was her only life insurance policy. She fortified her property with a quiet, almost invisible web of defenses. The new cameras she'd installed were tiny, some no bigger than a screw head, hidden in tree bark, fence posts, and the eaves of the barn. They weren't just for surveillance. They were to be her witnesses. She was creating a record, a bulwark of evidence against the lies she knew were coming. The lies arrived on a Tuesday morning, packaged in the form of a county-issued search warrant. Detective Vance was back, but this time his confidence was absolute, backed by the power of a judge's signature. He brought a team of 4 officers, their expressions grim and impersonal. Standing slightly behind the main group, looking deeply uncomfortable, was the young officer from the first visit. Anya's mind briefly snagged on his name tag. Jackson. Dr. Sharma, Vance announced, holding up the warrant like a trophy. We have a warrant to search these premises. We've received a credible tip regarding the illegal storage of unregistered firearms and volatile chemicals. The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. They were accusing her of the very sins they were committing. A credible tip from whom, Detective? Anya asked, her voice calm as she stepped aside, making no move to obstruct them. Vance smirked. Anonymous. Concerned citizen. You know how it is. He handed her the warrant. It looked official, citing public safety concerns and referencing a confidential informant. It was a fabrication, of course, but a legally airtight one. A judge, likely on TerraCorp's payroll or misled by a well-crafted affidavit, had signed off on it. Her hands were tied. My dogs need to be secured, Anya said, her only request. Of course, Vance agreed, magnanimous in his victory. Officer Jackson, you can escort the doctor while she secures the animals in the barn. It was a strategic move, separating her from her primary defense. Jackson followed her stiffly as she led Ghost and Nix toward the barn. The young officer's eyes were fixed on the ground, his jaw tight. He looked like a man at war with himself. I need them in the main stall, Anya said, leading them into the cavernous space. As she closed and latched the heavy wooden gate of the stall, she subtly activated the pinhole camera she had installed in a knot of wood overlooking the entire barn. Jackson stood by the doorway, his back mostly to her. The search began. It was not a search, it was a violation. The officers moved through her house with a cold, efficient destructiveness, pulling books from shelves, emptying drawers onto the floor. It was chaos with a purpose to demoralize, to overwhelm. Through it all, Anya stood by the barn door with Jackson, watching her sanctuary being dismantled. Vance directed the search, his voice sharp with commands. He sent 2 officers to the main house and 2 to the outbuildings. One of them, an officer she didn't recognize, headed directly for the large tool shed at the back of her property. He was inside for less than 2 minutes. Anya kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. The tool shed. It was the one place she hadn't had time to fully secure with cameras on the inside. A blind spot. Anything? Vance called out. All clear in the house, detective, one officer yelled back. Nothing in the outbuildings, another reported. Vance's expression tightened. This wasn't going according to plan. He strode toward the tool shed himself. Let's double-check our work, shall we? He entered the shed. A moment later, he emerged, holding up a small, heavy-looking object wrapped in an oily rag. He carefully unwrapped it, revealing a snub-nosed .38 caliber revolver, its serial number crudely filed off. Well, 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 Vance said, his voice ringing with mock surprise. What have we here? Looks like our tip was credible after all, Dr. Sharma. It was a perfect plant. The gun was untraceable, a ghost weapon, found in her shed, on her property. Her word against that of 5 police officers. Anya said nothing. She had expected this. The pinhole camera in the barn wouldn't have caught the plant in the shed, but she had a different angle. As Vance walked back toward her, triumphantly holding the gun, her eyes met Officer Jackson's. For a split second, she saw a flash of profound guilt and shame in his eyes. He quickly looked away, but the moment was there. He knew. He had seen the other officer go into the shed. He knew what had just happened. Anya Sharma, Vance declared, savoring the moment. You are under arrest for the possession of an illegal, defaced firearm. He nodded to one of his officers, who approached her with a pair of handcuffs. The cold metal bit into her wrists. As they led her toward the cruisers, a prisoner on her own land, she saw Jackson again. He had pulled out his personal cell phone, his head ducked down, his thumb moving quickly across the screen. Was he texting Vance to report his success? Or was he crossing a line, sending a message that would either save her or destroy his own career? She had no way of knowing. She was placed in the back of a cruiser, the door shutting with a final, definitive thud. Through the cage that separated her from the front seat, she watched her home, her sanctuary, recede into the distance. She had been outmaneuvered, stripped of her freedom, and perfectly framed. For the first time, a cold wave of genuine helplessness washed over her. The Redemption County holding cell was a study in institutional grime. A concrete bench, a stainless steel toilet, and the lingering scent of stale fear and antiseptic. The silence here was different from the silence at Wind's End. It was a dead, oppressive weight, designed to break the spirit. Anya sat on the bench, not in defeat, but in a state of coiled patience. They had taken her freedom, but they couldn't take her discipline. She regulated her breathing, slowed her heart rate, and turned the cell into a tactical waiting room. Hours later, Detective Vance appeared on the other side of the bars. He wasn't gloating. His demeanor was all business, a man offering a final, sensible way out. This doesn't have to get any worse, doctor, he said, his voice low and reasonable. Right now, you're looking at a felony charge. 5 years, minimum. You'll lose your veterinary license, your right to own a firearm, everything. Your life as you know it is over. He let that sink in before delivering the offer. But there's an alternative, a pre-trial diversion. You sign over the deed to your property, to the Redemption County Development Fund. In return, the DA's office will drop all charges. The gun disappears from evidence. You walk out of here today, a free woman, with the money from the original offer wired to your account. It's a clean break. It was a brilliant, predatory move. They were using the full weight of the state to crush her, then offering a seemingly generous escape hatch. It was coercion, laundered through the legal system. I want my phone call, Anya said, her voice flat. I want to call my lawyer. Vance sighed, a theatrical display of disappointment. Suit yourself. But the longer you wait, the harder this gets. Her lawyer, David Chen, arrived within the hour. He was a compact, whip-smart attorney in his 50s, with a reputation for being a bulldog in the courtroom. He had been Liam's friend before he was Anya's lawyer, and he listened to her account in the sterile interview room with a grim, focused intensity. They planted it. Anya finished, her voice low. I couldn't see it happen, but I know they did. Of course they did, David said, running a hand over his tired face. The problem isn't what we know, Anya. It's what we can prove. He stood up and began to pace. I'll file a motion to suppress based on a faulty warrant, but it's a long shot. They have an informant, even a fabricated one. It gives them probable cause. He made a few calls from the hallway, his voice a low, urgent murmur. When he returned, his expression was darker than before. He sat down opposite her, his face etched with a gravity that made Anya's stomach clench. We have a much bigger problem, he said quietly. The district attorney for this county is a man named Robert Patterson. Okay, Anya prompted. I did a quick search on him. 3 years ago, Patterson's wife was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. The treatment was experimental, astronomically expensive, and not covered by their insurance. A charitable foundation anonymously paid for the entire thing, saving her life. David slid his phone across the table. On the screen was the incorporation document for the foundation. I had a paralegal run the charity's registration number. Guess who sits on its board of directors? Anya looked at the screen. The names were unfamiliar, except for one. A subsidiary company she recognized from Leo's research. A company owned by TerraCorp. The breath left her lungs. The DA, she whispered. He's compromised. He's owned. David corrected grimly. He's not going to drop the charges. He's going to prosecute you with the full force of his office. He owes them. We are in a closed loop, a system designed to eat you alive. We can't fight them inside their own courthouse. For a moment, the walls of the small room seemed to close in. The legal system, the one thing she had hoped might offer a fair fight, was just another weapon pointed at her head. So what do we do? Anya asked, her voice steady despite the crushing weight of the revelation. David's eyes hardened, a spark of defiance igniting within them. We stop playing their game. We change the battlefield. He leaned forward. The system is compromised, but the public isn't. Not yet. TerraCorp's greatest strength is its anonymity, the shadows it operates in. We need to drag them into the light. We need to make this story so big, so loud, that they can't silence it. The new plan formed quickly, a desperate high-stakes gambit. David knew an investigative journalist, a Pulitzer winner named Sarah Jennings, who had a long and bitter history with TerraCorp after they'd crushed one of her stories years ago with an army of lawyers. She was relentless, and, more importantly, she held a grudge. Leo has the data, Anya said, her mind already shifting into mission mode. The drone footage, the water analysis, the financial ties, everything. I'll contact him, David said. Our job is to create enough reasonable doubt to get you out on bail. Your job is to survive until we can get that evidence to Jennings. Once the story breaks, the feds might have to step in. It's our only shot. He was right. It was a Hail Mary pass. The bail hearing was a formality. The DA's office, represented by a junior prosecutor, argued she was a flight risk and a danger to the community, citing the firearm charge and her military background. David countered fiercely, highlighting her service record, her deep ties to the community through her clinic, and the lack of any prior offenses. In the end, the judge set bail. It was an exorbitant amount, clearly meant to be punitive and impossible for a small-town veterinarian to meet. But as the judge announced the figure, David Chen's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and a slow smile spread across his face. "We can post that, Your Honor," he said, stunning the prosecutor into silence. Leo had come through. Working through a series of anonymous trusts, he had arranged the funds. It was another chess move in a game where the board was the entire county, and the pieces were human lives. An hour later, Anya walked out of the county jail and into the fading afternoon light. The air of freedom had never tasted so sharp, so precarious. She was out, but she was exposed. She was no longer just a person of interest. She was a liability who had slipped through their grasp. As David drove her back toward Wind's End, she stared out the window at the passing landscape. The farm was no longer a sanctuary. It was a target. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that they would be coming for her. The question was no longer how to win in court. It was how to survive the night. The moment Anya stepped back onto her property, the familiar sense of peace was gone, replaced by the heightened awareness of a soldier entering a kill zone. Wind's End was no longer a refuge. It was a battlefield she had to hold until reinforcements in the form of Sarah Jennings's investigative report could arrive. David Chen had been blunt before he left. They can't let you talk to her, Anya. They won't. TerraCorp wouldn't send uniformed police this time. Plausible deniability was their creed. They would send professionals, men who moved in the shadows and left no trace. Men who specialized in asset retrieval and problem resolution. As dusk bled into a moonless, overcast night, Anya prepared for the hunt. This wasn't about fortification. It was about evasion and control of the terrain. She didn't board up windows. She created lanes of fire and fatal funnels. She rigged a series of simple, non-lethal alarms, using fishing line and small bells in the dense woods surrounding the house. She placed motion-activated floodlights not on her house, but pointing outwards from the tree line, designed to blind and expose anyone approaching from the darkness. Inside, she was a ghost in her own home, moving with silent purpose. She disabled all the interior lights, plunging the house into blackness. Her only illumination came from the faint glow of a tablet displaying the feeds from her hidden cameras. She wore dark clothing, her military-grade night vision goggles turning the world into a landscape of ghostly green and black. She gave Ghost and Nix their final commands, not with words, but with a series of quiet hand signals. They understood. This was not a defense. This was a hunt. Their roles were specific. Ghost, the faster and more agile of the two, was the Harrier, tasked with creating diversions and hurting the intruders. Nix, the powerhouse, was the Hammer, assigned to intercept and neutralize direct threats. At 2:17 a.m., the first perimeter camera went dark. A professional snip. A moment later, a second camera feed blinked out, then a third. They were good. They were moving in a coordinated pattern, a classic three-man cell, sweeping in from the west, using the dense woods as their cover. Her tablet showed them as shimmering green figures on the thermal camera she'd placed on the barn roof. They moved with the fluid, disciplined grace of soldiers. They carried suppressed carbines and wore tactical gear. They weren't here to talk. They were here to erase a problem. Anya didn't wait for them to reach the house. She initiated the first phase of her plan. A small remote-controlled device she had placed near the kennels began emitting the high-pitched, frantic barking of a dozen dogs. It was a recording, but in the dead of night it was a powerful diversion. The three figures immediately froze, their weapons snapping toward the source of the sound, their attention pulled away from their primary objective. In that moment of misdirection, Anya unleashed her true defense. With a silent hand signal, she sent Ghost out the back door. He moved like smoke, a pale blur against the dark earth, circling wide around the intruders. He was the distraction. Simultaneously, she sent Nix out the front, a dark shadow melting into the deeper shadows of the porch. She was the interceptor. As the intruders cautiously advanced on the recorded barking, Ghost struck from their flank. He didn't attack. He crashed through the underbrush 100 feet to their left, a calculated burst of noise and movement, before disappearing back into the darkness. The team leader immediately gestured for one of his men to break off and investigate the new threat, splitting their force. It was a classic L-shaped ambush, and they had walked right into it. The remaining two continued toward the house. Anya watched them on her screen as they stepped over one of her tripwires. A bank of high-intensity LED floodlights erupted, bathing them in a sudden, blinding glare. They were momentarily stunned, their night vision useless. That's when Nix hit them. She didn't target the team leader. She targeted the second man, the support. She exploded from the darkness of the porch, a 90-pound missile of focused fury, clamping down on the man's rifle with a crunch of metal and composite material, wrenching it from his grasp. The man yelled in shock and pain as the force of the impact sent him staggering backward. The team leader spun, raising his own weapon, but Anya was already moving. From the darkened doorway, she fired a single shot from a less lethal beanbag shotgun. The round struck the leader square in the chest, the impact knocking the wind out of him and sending him to the ground with a heavy thud. It was all over in less than 10 seconds. One man disarmed, one neutralized, and the third isolated in the woods, now realizing he was alone. But as the echoes of the confrontation faded, a new sound emerged, the squeal of tires on asphalt. A vehicle was coming down her road, fast, too fast for a neighbor. Anya grabbed her night vision goggles. Through the green-tinted world, she saw a familiar county-issued pickup truck careening down her driveway, its headlights off. It screeched to a halt, and a figure jumped out. It was Officer Jackson. He was holding a service pistol, his face a mask of panic and grim resolve. He had made his choice. "Get down," State police are on their way. I called them, he shouted into the darkness, his voice cracking. He had come to help. He had crossed the line. As he ran toward the porch to check on her, another shape detached itself from the deep shadow of an ancient oak tree near the driveway. This figure hadn't been part of the tactical team. He had been watching, waiting. Anya saw the glint of metal in his hand just as Jackson turned. "Jackson, no!" she screamed. A single, sharp crack, unsuppressed and brutally loud, split the night. Jackson cried out and crumpled to the ground, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. The figure stepped out of the shadows. Even in the dim light, there was no mistaking the cold, determined face. It was Detective Caleb Vance. He hadn't sent the team. He had followed it, a scavenger trailing the predators, ready to ensure there were no loose ends. And Officer Jackson had just become the loosest end of all. The world snapped into a terrifying, narrow focus. Jackson bleeding on her lawn, Vance standing over him like a triumphant hunter, and the two neutralized TerraCorp operatives beginning to stir. Anya's mind, honed by years of battlefield triage, processed the variables in a fraction of a second. The immediate threat wasn't the corporate thugs. It was the cop with the smoking gun. "Hold your position," Vance yelled, his voice raw with adrenaline as he pointed his weapon toward the porch. "You're harboring a fugitive, Sharma." He was wanted for questioning. It was a desperate, nonsensical lie, a story he was creating in real time to justify the cold-blooded shooting of a fellow officer. Enya didn't answer. She gave Nix a low, urgent command, walked, placing her on guard over the downed operatives. Then, with a hand signal to Ghost, she initiated a pincer movement. She faded back into the absolute darkness of the house, while Ghost, a pale specter, began a silent looping advance through the shadows to Vance's right. Vance was focused on the porch, on the last place he'd seen her. It was a fatal mistake. He never saw Ghost coming. The dog didn't attack his gun hand. That was too risky. He targeted Vance's footing, striking the back of his knee with the force of a battering ram. Vance's leg buckled, and as he stumbled, off balance and swearing, Anya emerged from a side window, closing the distance. Before he could recover, she had him in a submission hold, her forearm tight against his throat, her other hand expertly disarming him. The fight was over before he even understood it had begun. Headlights flooded the scene as a second car, the black Mercedes, tore down the driveway, skidding to a halt behind Jackson's truck. Marcus Thorne leaped out, his face pale with panic, his tailored suit now rumpled and stained. He stared at the tableau, two downed operatives in tactical gear, a bleeding police officer, another detective in a chokehold, and Anya Sharma at the center of it all, a figure of deadly calm. "They told me they were just sending someone to talk to you," Thorne stammered, his voice thin and reedy. He looked genuinely horrified. "I swear to God, I didn't know it would be this. They're out of control. They cut me out, stopped returning my calls." He had finally realized what Anya and Leo already knew. To TerraCorp, he wasn't a partner. He was a disposable asset, a tool whose purpose had been served. Now that the situation had escalated, he was just another liability to be cleaned up. His pristine dream of Oakhaven had been built on a toxic lie, and the lie was about to consume him, too. In that moment, a flicker of something new passed between Anya and Thorne. They were not allies, not friends. But they were now, improbably, on the same side. Two very different people standing against the same monolithic, faceless enemy. "They will bury us all, Doctor. Sharma," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "They will call this a drug deal gone wrong. They'll say Jackson was a dirty cop, that you were his supplier, that I was caught in the crossfire. They own the narrative. Unless..." He didn't have to finish the sentence. Anya knew what he was offering. He was the one person who could corroborate her story from the inside. "I have everything," Thorne said, speaking quickly, as if afraid the opportunity would vanish. "Contracts, internal memos, encrypted emails with their executives, the real geological surveys, the ones showing the mine. I kept a private record of it all. An insurance policy. It's yours, all of it. Use it to burn them to the ground." This was the final, stunning twist of the night. Her greatest adversary was now offering her the very weapon she needed to win. In exchange for what? Anya asked, her grip on Vance not loosening. "Immunity? A deal?" Thorne laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "It's too late for that. I'll face the consequences for my part in this. What I want is a chance to save what's real, my community. The people I brought here, they believe in Oakhaven. Don't let TerraCorp turn it into a toxic wasteland. Help me save them. It was a choice Anya never could have imagined. To trust the man who had systematically tried to destroy her life. She looked at Jackson, whose breathing was shallow, and then at Thorne, whose carefully constructed world had just crumbled around him. Her enemy wasn't the man with the misguided dream. It was the corporate entity that preyed on dreams like his. Distant sirens began to wail, growing steadily closer. The state police Jackson had called. Time was up. Anya made her decision. She nodded once, a sharp, definitive movement. As if on cue, a third vehicle arrived, pulling in quietly behind Thorne's Mercedes. It was an unassuming rental car. The door opened and a woman stepped out, a trench coat pulled tight around her, her face sharp and intelligent. She held a phone to her ear, its screen glowing. "David, I'm here," the woman said into the phone, her voice crisp and professional. "You were right. The scene is active." She looked around, her eyes taking in every detail with a journalist's practiced, unflinching gaze. It was Sarah Jennings. Leo and David had gambled, sending her down ahead of the data package, betting that the situation would detonate. Their bet had paid off spectacularly. Jennings's eyes met Anya's across the chaotic scene. She saw the downed operatives, the bleeding officer, the disarmed detective, and the unlikely, desperate alliance forming between the woman soldier and the disgraced developer. The story of a lifetime had just landed in her lap. The game had changed. The battlefield had expanded from a small farm in North Carolina to the front page of every newspaper in the country. And the first shot was about to be fired. The arrival of the state police and paramedics turned the chaotic scene at Wind's End into a federal crime scene. Sarah Jennings's presence acted as a powerful disinfectant, her camera documenting every piece of evidence, every testimony, preventing the local narrative from taking hold. Vance's desperate lies about a drug deal evaporated under the glare of her flash and the weight of the unfolding truth. The story broke 48 hours later. It wasn't just a story, it was a bombshell. The Poisoned Haven, Jennings's front-page expose, was a meticulous and damning account of corporate malfeasance on an epic scale. It had everything. Anya's harrowing ordeal, Leo's irrefutable data, Officer Jackson's heroic last stand, and the explosive insider evidence provided by Marcus Thorne. The article went viral, and the fallout was swift and brutal. The FBI, forced into action by the public outcry and pressure from Washington, descended on Redemption County. TerraCorp is carefully constructed. Walls of plausible deniability crumbled. Search warrants were executed on their corporate headquarters. The SEC launched an investigation into stock manipulation. The EPA initiated a full-scale environmental impact inquiry. The corporate ghost had been dragged into the light, and it could not withstand the scrutiny. Justice, when it finally came, was multifaceted. Detective Caleb Vance was convicted of attempted murder, conspiracy, and a host of corruption charges. He received a life sentence, his cold ambition ending in a cold cell. The TerraCorp executives who orchestrated the scheme were indicted under the RICO Act. Their trials would be long and complex, but their careers were over, their reputations shattered. The compromised district attorney was disbarred and faced federal charges for obstruction of justice. Marcus Thorne, true to his word, cooperated fully. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy and fraud. In exchange for his testimony, which was instrumental in convicting the TerraCorp executives, he received a significantly reduced sentence, serving 2 years in a minimum security facility. Officer Jackson survived. After months of rehabilitation, he was hailed as a hero, a symbol of integrity within a broken system. He quietly retired from the force, unable to wear the same uniform as men like Vance, but his actions had inspired a deep review of the county police department, leading to dismissals and reforms. The future of Oak Haven, and Redemption County itself, was reborn from the ashes of TerraCorp's greed. The federal investigation froze all of the corporation's assets in the region, including the land they had acquired. In a landmark settlement, TerraCorp was forced to establish a multi-billion-dollar environmental trust fund to clean up the damage they had caused and to fund sustainable development for the community. Anya Sharma did not sell her farm. She became an integral part of the new beginning. She sat on the citizens' board that oversaw the trust fund, ensuring the money was used not for corporate interests, but for the people. She worked alongside a chastened Marcus Thorne after his release, and with the true community leaders of Oak Haven. They didn't build a mine. They built the dream that Thorne had once used as a lie. The charter school was built, not on Anya's land, but on a plot donated by the trust. Oakhaven became a model for integrated, sustainable living. The animosity between the old residents and the new slowly dissolved, replaced by a shared sense of victory and a common purpose. They had all been targeted by the same enemy, and they had survived it together. Several years later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Anya stood on the hill behind her barn, the same hill that was once the epicenter of TerraCorp's planned mine. The view was breathtaking. Below, the diverse, thriving community of Redemption spread out, a patchwork of old farms and new, thoughtfully designed neighborhoods. The air was clean, the water was pure. Ghost and Nyx rested at her feet, their fur graying at the muzzle, their days of combat and crisis finally behind them. They were content, watching the world with the peaceful gaze of guardians whose watch was finally over. A group of children, a mix of black, white, and Hispanic faces, were on a field trip in the community garden that now occupied what was once a contested field. Their laughter carried on the wind. Their teacher, a man who moved with a quiet, hard-won humility, was Marcus Thorne. He was showing them how to test the soil, how to nurture life from the ground up. He caught Anya's eye from across the distance and gave a small, respectful nod. It was a gesture of shared history, of a painful and profound redemption. Anya had found her peace, but not in the isolation she had once sought. She had found it in the fight, in the connection, in the act of rebuilding. She had faced the ghosts of her past, not just the specters of war, but the modern phantoms of corporate greed and systemic corruption, and she had won. She had come to this land seeking a sanctuary from the world, a place to heal her wounds in silence. Instead, the world had followed her, forcing her into one last battle. In winning it, she had not only saved her home, she had helped a community find its own. She had finally truly found redemption.